Hi all, Dan Richardson here, Head of Nutrition at Your PT, and welcome to the nutrition section of the Your PT Hub. Ultimately, we're going to dissect the myths and the truths around nutrition when it comes to prescribing and supporting and what we should and shouldn't do with our clientele on the gym floor. We're going to kick things off in today's video talking about some of the basics of nutrition when it comes to health. So we're going to go through a multitude of different factors and areas when it comes to nutrition. First being macronutrients, leading into micronutrients. Then we're going to look at how we can build this into a food plate that pulls us away from the day-to-day standard Eat Well guide and the government guidance. And then we're going to end at looking at some of the practical applications of how we can use this as personal trainers. So the first section, macronutrients. Now I'm aware that we haven't all been living under a rock for the last 10, 15 years. And we'll understand, roughly speaking, the majority of us of what carbohydrates, fats, protein and fiber are. But it's always great to recap on these areas. We know that carbohydrates are the fundamental factors to ultimately having enough energy to go day to day. Our energy burn, when we look at it on a graph, ultimately makes up around 70% of our total daily energy expenditure comes from the energy that we need just to live. Effectively our BMR. Now carbohydrates play a big part in supporting our BMR, our basal metabolic rate. So it's so important that we have regular hits of carbohydrates across the day to support our overall energy and movement. And that isn't even looking deeply into our kind of movement patterns in the gym. So just our day-to-day energy. Then we've got our fats. Now the way I describe fats to athletes and clients is ultimately it's our secondary energy source. Now granted, fats play more than just that role within our body. They're important for hormone function, metabolization, and other health functions that are required to support our body. But the way I like us to envision it, specifically as personal trainers, is if we think about a hybrid car. Now, I'm not rich enough or fancy enough to own a hybrid car, but if I did have one, ultimately, I would know how the tanks work within that. So we've got our fuel tank, that's our carbohydrates. That's our main source of energy throughout the day or throughout our driving in the car. And then, of course, we've got our battery, that smaller energy tank filled with good quality energy that we may need whilst on our journey in an athlete perspective or a client perspective in our day-to-day. Now, that would be ultimately our fats. So they come hand in hand in regards to supporting our body with our energy. And then we have to look at our third kind of, I suppose, macronutrient that we'll all be aware of, which is protein. Now, we'll talk about recovery later on in today's video, but ultimately more protein doesn't equal better recovery. And that's something we really need to get across to our clients. Just because we're upping our protein intake doesn't mean we're going to have bigger or stronger muscles. We need to be smart with our protein intake by splitting it up into equal portions across the day. We know that protein's key for hormonal regulation, but also it plays a vital role in the recovery of our muscles and the rebuilding and growing of our muscles after training or intense activity. And then finally, I mentioned fiber, typically found within our fruit and veg, a huge component that often tips into that micronutrient side of our foods, which we're going to speak about in the next section. So, fiber or micronutrients, the little things that make the big difference when it comes to our health. Think of it as our vitamins and minerals, our wraparound support for our body. And when we're speaking with clients, we need to be ensuring that they're eating at least 5 different fruit and veg a day. Now, when we think about fruit and veg, we often think about, in our meals or a piece of fruit. I would task you to speak with your clients about trying to eat more than 5 pieces of fruit and veg a day. The actual science suggests that we need 30 different varieties of fruit and veg across a singular week for optimal health. So 5 a day doesn't quite cut it if we're having a banana, an apple, an orange, maybe some carrots and broccoli within our meals. So what I'd task you to do is have your clients track their fruit and veg intake. It's a super simple habit that we can look to do. And this could be as easy as maybe adding blueberries, strawberries and raspberries to our morning oats, just giving us a little bit more micronutrient power within those foods. Or maybe at lunch, for example, if we have a ham and cheese sandwich, adding a small bag of lettuce leaves, potentially some sweet corn in there, just to really amplify the foods that we're having. And then, of course, yes, we can snack on carrot sticks, celery with hummus across the day, or potentially a sliced apple or an orange, which is going to increase up towards that 30 different types of fruit and veg a week. but arguably we might be able to get it through meals. A spaghetti bolognese is one of my staples that I recommend to clients. Super simple and effective, and we can get a lot of different types of fruit and veg into that meal. So again, cheap options, frozen options of veg. We can go for sweet corn, we can go for peas. We can also add chopped tomatoes, which is one of our 5 a day, potentially even tomato puree to add to the sauce. And then we might add onions, peppers, and carrots. And I'm starting to run out of fingers of counting up how many different fruit and veg are within that singular meal. So prescribing these habits to our clients can be super beneficial, especially when we're looking at the micronutrients and the vitamins and minerals that we want to get in for our athletes and clients. Now, thinking about micronutrients, yes, vitamins and minerals and individual vitamins and minerals play a key role in our overall health. Vitamin C is really important for protecting our immune function, whilst calcium is really important for healthy bones. Now, I could go through the A to Z of vitamins and minerals, but I'm sure we can put a guide in the Your PT Hub, which describes these in more detail. So you don't have to spend this whole video listening to me list out every single one of them. But arguably, just understanding a few of those key vitamins and minerals and prescribing and supporting your athletes and clients where we can, ultimately with those foods, can be really beneficial. So we now understand macronutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, and we also understand fiber, vitamins and minerals, fruit and veg. But how do we put these onto a plate for our clients to make it super simple that they can build habits that last a lifetime? I think we are really guilty in the nutrition sphere of overcomplicating nutrition. Now, the Eat Well Guide provides a really good opportunity for us to see how food should be presented on a plate in regards to portion sizes. We will speak in the next video around performance nutrition and how we may manipulate that food plate to be specific for performance for pre and post training. But for now, understanding a balanced food plate is going to be critical to our client's success. So we want to think about having a third of our plate made up of fruit and veg, a third of our plate made up of carbohydrates, and the remainder of the plate is split between our proteins and our fats. Now, quite simply, if we were to build 3 meals a day built of those plates and integrate some of those fruit and veg based snacks, potentially some more carbohydrates if we require it, or protein, we're building a really balanced, robust nutrition structure to the day for our clients. What we're trying to do is not overcomplicate it with weighing out specific portions and then trying to understand individual micronutrients and macronutrients of key components of food. What we want to do is visually appeal to our clientele by giving them plates to follow. Now, of course, I understand that if we were to spread some rice really thin on a plate and make it a third of a plate, that would be very different to heaped spoonfuls of rice on a plate. So we can actually use our hands to start to get them to understand what a portion looks like. So a closed and clenched fist full of carbohydrates is around a quarter to a third of our plate. Now, this is individual to each client, because if you think about it, your hands may be much bigger or smaller than your clients. But actually, if we were to put that down on a food plate, that would make up our carbohydrate volume that we require. When we think of a third of our plate made up of protein, what we want to do is look towards a palm-sized serving of protein on the plate. Now, typically, supermarkets are very good at portioning off what a size or a palm-sized piece of protein looks like. So think of a salmon fillet or a singular chicken breast or a piece of steak would pretty much make up that palm-sized amount that we'd be looking towards, maybe with a little bit more volume. So that would work perfectly for building that plate. And then, of course, finally, we'd be looking at fruit and veg intake. Now, a singular portion of fruit and veg to hit one of our 5 a day, or 10 a day, as we previously mentioned, would roughly be a palm size plus fingers to ultimately give us the maximum amount that we should have on that food plate made up of a third. So if we start to build these different, I suppose, different visuals when it comes to food, arguably we're going to be in a really good place to be able to build good, structured, habitual plates for our clients to achieve success, not just on the gym floor, but away from the gym in our kitchens. So the last section of today's video on the Your PT Hub is around nutritional balance. Now, what I'm not talking about here is your traditional balance, which is energy intake versus energy expenditure. What I'm speaking about here is ultimately balancing our foods from good to fun foods. Now, realize I didn't say bad foods there. Something I really want you to go after with your clients. There's no such thing as a bad food. Arguably, all food is good if eaten in moderation. So a rule that we adopt within the professional sports world with our athletes that we work with day to day is the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, listen to your personal trainer. Make sure that you're doing all the right things with your food, balancing your food plate, supporting your endeavors within the gym and the goals that you've set out. But then 20% of the time, have a little bit of freedom and flexibility. That might be a takeaway on a Saturday night. That might potentially be a few glasses of wine on a stressful Monday evening. It might even be having some chocolate at work when somebody's birthday is going on. But what we have to really drill into our clients is that nutrition, for it to be sustainable, can't be done 100% of the time. It's within our human nature to enjoy a treat or some other foods that maybe aren't quite on plan. And I'd task you to ask any of your clients that have tried to stick to a nutrition plan that's 100% strict for more than 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll notice something called a binge cycle. Arguably, they'll be able to do it for 2 to 3 weeks. It'll get to a weekend of struggle, and actually we'll cave in and end up binging and undoing all the good work that we've done. So we're not talking about calorie banking here and, eating less during the week so we can go crazy on a weekend. We're talking about a sustainable habit that we can do Monday through to Sunday and arguably still get the best out of our nutrition. So for example, looking at the professional sports world, which I spend a lot of time in, Gabby Douglas, who was a professional gymnast, used to have a piece of gingerbread and custard after every evening meal because that was her little 20%. Whereas somebody like Michael Phelps used to have a Subway for lunch every day because that was his 20%. So get your clients to understand what their 20% foods are and the volume of those foods that they should be consuming across the week to ensure that they've got sustainable habits going across a longitudinal period of time instead of finding themselves stuck in a 2 to 3 week cycle with a binge at the end of it. So that's been the first session on nutrition for our clients. And I think it's so important that we utilize this in a way that we're not prescribing specific nutrition to our clients, but we're guiding and supporting our clients into healthier, safer, and more sustainable practices when it comes to nutrition. Stick around for the next few videos where we're going to explore some of the real aspects of performance nutrition, supplements, and actually how we bring this all together specifically for our clients.